Who is the most underrated actor of all time?
It's Dolph Lundgren.
Correct. Why?
Well, because of his spiky hair, and his ice-cold demeanor, and his big muscles.
Absolutely.
I must break you. The guilty will be punished.
My name is Sergeant Andrew Scott.
Come on, guys, don't do this. If I don't get breakfast, I get real grumpy. I don't think you like me grumpy. And you go in pieces, asshole.
Let's kick some ass.
Hello and welcome back to I Must Break This Podcast, the fan podcast celebrating the cinematic career of action legend Dolph Lundgren. Today, we're going back to 2013 and discussing the action-adventure film Legendary. In this hybrid of Indiana Jones, The Mummy, and other classic adventure serials, Dolph teams up with Scott Adkins once again, this time where they play two rival expedition crews who travel to China to capture a mythical beast that isn't supposed to exist.
What is that?
Something spooking the fish.
There's been another attack.
It's huge. I've never seen anything like it.
Don't you think it'd make one hell of a trophy?
Dr. Travis Preston. My client would very much like to engage your services.
We heard you have some sort of animal on the loose here. Whatever it is, it's big, it's stealthy, and it's smart. I'm here to help stop the attacks.
I'm afraid you're a little late, Dr. Preston.
If I get a shot, I'll take it. Are we clear?
People need a professional like me, and not an amateur like you.
Something's just appeared beneath us. 300 yards out, coming in fast. 200. 100.
Predators understand predators.
You shoot to wound, I shoot to kill.
This isn't a game park, Hawker.
Do you feel threatened, Dr. Preston?
Doesn't need to die.
Everything needs to die, Travis, even you.
Hold on. Coming back around.
It's coming!
I'll be the one to put it down.
I'm your host, Sean, and returning to the show once again is my buddy Richard Hawes from the DTV Digest. Richard, thanks again for coming back, man.
It's great to be back. Thank you for inviting me. Always good to talk about Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I, this one has been percolating for quite a while. I mean, I know you're, I mean, is it fair to say you're a big fan of this one, right? You saw a lot of merit in this one that made it worthy of discussion. So I'll just, put it out there right now. I was unfairly going to sandwich this one as part of a combo episode. And I remember you were pretty much like, no, this film needs its own discussion. So thank you again for coming back.
No, it's great. No, it is agree. I do think it's quite an interesting one. It's not one that some of the fans, especially Scott Adkins fans, wanted at the time. But I think if you can go back and look at it in hindsight, you can see a lot of merit in it, I think.
Well, and before we get rolling with this one, I mean, you and I, the last time I had you back on, it was safe, and we cracked open a couple beverages. So, if it's okay with you, I'm getting ready to crack open my next one. I'm assuming you have yours ready to rock and roll as well, right?
I've got it right here. Yep.
All right. Okay. So I just opened mine. You and I, this is purely coincidental, we should say, but you and I both apparently are going for a beach theme, I guess, with this recording. I have it's called a Mountain Beach beer from the Breckenridge Brewery. There's the crack of yours too. Mine has pineapple, lime, and guava. You have a cider once again, is that right?
Yes, it's a pina colada cider. I've never had that before. I just found it in the supermarket. It's pineapple and coconut. So
there
it
you
should
go.
be pretty interesting.
Man, and now that I'm thinking about this, perhaps this beach theme would have been more appropriate for Safe, not this.
That would have been, yes, that would have been. But I didn't come across this one at the time. I don't think they stocked it. I think it was just, that would have been a perfect time to drink this one. But hey, we're going to be by a lake. It's pretty close, isn't it? So.
It's very close. Yeah, I just think it's interesting that for this Chinese-based production, you and I both are drinking a couple of manly beverages infused with pineapple. There you go. There you go. So, well, I mean, look, if you look at the show, I feel kind of bad, but I've kind of unfairly glossed over this one throughout my rundown of Lundgren's entire filmography. And I wouldn't say, it's not my favorite Dolph Lundgren film. I'll just get that right out of the way right now. But I don't think I glossed over it necessarily because it's a bad movie. I think in the end, it's a film that is kind of easily forgotten amidst all of his other films. I mean, this was filmed around the same time as Expendables 2, Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning, and a number of other titles. Okay, and at the time I first saw it, there really wasn't much for me to get excited about, and so I kind of forgot about it as time marched on. I mean, and like I said earlier, it was filmed around the same time as Expendables 2 and Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning. So this kind of came out in the midst of these other films that, for lack of better terms, I think were better than this particular one. So this is one that just kind of languished behind and kind of sat. And I think in many respects, I don't know where you stand on it, but I think in many respects, I think it's also a film that both Lundgren and Scott Adkins have kind of forgotten about as well.
Yeah, I think they probably both moved on quite quickly. Both of them have their careers run at quite a pace anyway. So I think this is probably, even though it's less than 10 years ago, it's probably like a really sort of distant memory for them now. They probably moved on to, the more exciting projects. For Scott, this was something a bit different in which he was the lead, but it's not an action-heavy role. It was kind of he was injured at the time, so he took a different kind of project. So that was more the impetus, I think, for him taking this particular role. And with Dolph, he was signing on for various things, and I like to think that he saw something in the character here that was of interest, and I think he did bring, he definitely brings something to the role. But perhaps because with one thing or another, I don't think the film turned out quite the way everyone was hoping. Although not as bad as maybe some people might think, but I don't think it necessarily was the project that everyone had in mind. So it wasn't. I think maybe they sort of just I'm going to move on to the next thing now, and they probably don't think too much about it. For example, Scott Adkins did an interview with Dolph for the Art of Action series that he did. And at no point in that episode did they talk about working on Legendary. They talk about things like Castle Falls and stuff, but yeah, I think there's too many other things on their minds, and the things that people want to hear them talk about, and there's not a lot of information out there about Legendary.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think on the offset, this particular film, it does have some interesting things that I think sound intriguing to someone who is coming in with zero idea of what the final product is. Okay. For one, you have Scott Adkins and Dolph Lundgren, two action stars, okay, in this expedition style film where they're hunting down this legendary monster. I think that right there, okay, two action stars in this kind of wannabe Indiana Jones type tale where they're tracking down this monster, like we keep saying. I think that is a cool conceit. I think as I watched this again, and the two elements that I think I'm going to keep coming back to, I think unfortunately it doesn't use its 3 stars, I think we can say, to its full potential. First of all, Dolph Lundgren and Scott Adkins, I don't think it really utilizes them to their full potential and what we know and what we like seeing them do. And I think in the end, what is actually in some respects, kind of a bigger crime is that the titular monster of this film, I imagine we're going to be getting to the monster, but the titular monster of this film, I don't think that is used to its full potential either. So in the end, you're watching this film that just kind of, in a lot of respects, just kind of lays there in the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. I think there's the problem. There are problems with the pacing and the presence of the creature, and when the creature is revealed, what the creature actually looks like. I think maybe there's some slight problems there, and I'd also say there's a little bit of a joined up problem in terms of what they filmed and trying to add in the visual effects and make it match up. It's not as there's the body move. Let's say somebody's being attacked by the monster. The body movements and stuff don't match up with the animation that they then put on top of them and stuff like that. So there's little quibbles there. I don't know if it was it wasn't a fast shoot. I think they actually shot it over like 3 months. So they had a fair amount of time. And there's a lot of it is, it's on location. It's walking around China, rural areas of China. So I would imagine they had the time to do all the, retakes and everything for, what they were planning to do, the visualization of what the monster was, holding up the little ball on a stick or whatever that was supposed to be the monster that the guys were running away from or whatever. But yeah, I think maybe possibly the low budget nature of the production, perhaps. I mean, I don't think it's not that low budget, but I think the budget was about 12 million. That's what it's been reported as, which is considerably lower than I like to. So a comparable project to this that people would have heard of, I would say, would be The Meg, because that's another movie with a British lead. It's a Chinese co-production with a big monster and stuff. There isn't. I don't think in that movie there's actually a Dolph Lundgren type antagonistic character that I recall, but I don't remember the film very well, to be honest. But but that had like $130 million budget, so there's a massive difference there. And I think a lot of it is just sort of general shooting and sort of trying to get the location shoots and stuff. And then unfortunately, some of the monster stuff might have been more of a bit of an afterthought. Although I still think it actually stands up reasonably well on repeated viewings. I think on that initial viewing, you might be a bit, slightly dumbfounded by it. But I think some of the beats and stuff work quite well. And yeah, it's, as I say, as we go through it, I think we'll point out, there are strengths here, but it's not the film that you're going to, that any of us expected going into it. I think there's, for one thing, it's advertised with Dolph as the main star. On the poster, he was on the left, Scott was on the right. At least in most versions of the poster that I've seen. So, and Dolph is not the lead. Dolph is the antagonist who turns up every now and again. And Scott is the lead. And I think people would they might be disappointed that Dolph isn't in it that much. 2, they might be disappointed that with Scott, not being, doing all the high kicking stuff that he's most well known for. And 3, the monster factor. So, but I think coming back to it, especially on these repeated viewings, I was quite charmed by it the first time, and I still do think there's a lot of charm in there. And I think we'll hopefully highlight, why that is as we're going through the storyline. By the way, I opened my pina colada cider, and it's very tasty.
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised. I don't have a cider. Mine is just a fruity flavored beer, but mine is actually pretty tasty as well. Yeah. Well, and I think there is in the end, when you look at a film like this, I think there is a certain kind of novelty in seeing these two action stars and tough guys occupying the same space on screen and in a movie together. I mean, let's face it, that right there is the entire gimmick behind films like The Expendables, obviously, and Escape Plan and Tango and Cash and whatnot. So here, I think it's very welcome. And especially, I mean, look, Dolph Lundgren and Scott Adkins have an amazing chemistry with one another. I mean, this is evidenced in films like Expendables 2 and Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, as we keep saying. So when you hear that they are in this film together, okay, that right there is pretty exciting. However, there are virtually zero action sequences in this film. There is only one punch thrown in this entire 90-minute film, and that is by Adkins, which, I mean, I go back on this a multiple couple of ways, Rich. I mean, on one hand, I think, okay, that right there is kind of an intriguing aspect, okay, that you have two action stars together in a film with virtually zero action in it. So if you are a Scott Adkins or a Dolph Lundgren completist, then you may look at that and you may think, okay, that's pretty fun. That's pretty novel. But if you're not, okay, and you want to go into this and you're renting it thinking, oh, it is a new Dolph movie, it is a new Scott Adkins movie. Okay, we're going to be seeing some kicking, maybe where they're teaming up and kicking a monster. And then we don't get any of that. And so you watch it in the end, okay, after when the credits start rolling in this, you almost half wonder if maybe anyone else should have been cast and maybe anyone else should have been a cast. But again, I think that in a weird way, that's kind of, for me, part of the charm, but also the frustration. You know what I mean? You have these two action stars in a PG-13 monster movie with zero action whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, especially as, like you say, this is coming off of, I mean, one of the films that they did previously, you mentioned, was Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, which is such a high standard of a film, with such great action. You know, this is very different. I mean, they're both, I would say they're both very well shot movies. You know, they're both very high standard of, you know, the quality of the cinematography and stuff. But we don't have, you know, nearly the amount of, you know, I mean, Scott, say, was injured and whatever at the time, but yes, they only have basically throws one punch. I think there's a little bit of a tussle at the end, and there's some stuff, but it's all basically verbal sparring between right. the two characters, basically. And yeah, I think this is pitched very differently. So I think whereas, you know, Day of Reckoning or whatever, you would never be able to, it's not a family film or anything. This is like perfect, innocuous Sunday afternoon kind of fare. It's you know, obviously trying to sort of ride the coattails a little bit of things like Jurassic Park and, like you say, The Mummy. And I think it does it does what it sort of sets out to in that regard. I think but yes, so it is an oddity by virtue of, say, what you're saying with Scott Adkins and Dolph. You're not going to get what you're thinking you're going to get, which sadly is kind of par for the course with a lot of this stuff these days. I mean, when the Castle Falls came out, so all these years later, there was a fear that, oh yeah, they're both on the cover. Dolph's directing, whatever, but we're probably not going to see them together that much. And it was actually quite a pleasant surprise when there was a lot of action involving them both. They were both, you know, in the film a lot, and that was actually a much higher standard. This one is, it's more of, I wouldn't say Dolph is kind of guest starring in this one, because it's a bit more, there's a bit more going on than that. But it's definitely sort of, it's Scott's show. It's a Scott movie more than a Dolph movie. But I think Dolph certainly makes his presence felt, albeit not with any particular. You know, it's just him looking menacing with a gun, basically, for the most part. It's not him actually doing anything nasty. He's actually, you know, in the realms of bad guys, he's kind of talking a good guy. He's kind of talking the game all the time. He's not actually doing anything particularly nasty. His motivation, his character's motivation, is that he would rather shoot the monster, whereas Scott would rather, Travis, played by Scott, would rather save it and preserve, you know, take it to a somewhere to sort of be studied and stuff. So that's it, really. There's not a lot more to it than that. He's not an evil character. He's just he doesn't see the value in, you know, the preserving the life of any animal, whether it's a fantastical, you know, sort of mythological, you know, cryptid, I believe they call it, or not. Although in this movie, he's not as convinced as Scott is that it is a mythological creature. He thinks it might be like a crocodile or something.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent segue, because that's what I was going to get into. I mean, this is, as you said, this is Scott Adkins' movie, which is fine. Okay. I mean, I think as we look back upon it, this film was actually a good opportunity for Scott Adkins. Okay. I mean, he was nursing, I think it was in knee surgery, or he had a bum knee at the time. And so this was an opportunity for him to get work while not fully exerting himself like he does, like he typically does in films, right? And with this one, I mean, you can see, just like with every film Scott Adkins does, I feel like I always say this on the podcast, but I mean, Scott Adkins, he gives 110% to every film that he does, regardless of the level of the production. I mean, and he's also gone on record in saying that he is a trained actor. So I think this film is an interesting showcase for him to show off his charisma rather than just his muscles and kicks, I think, which is a nice change of pace. And you said it already, okay, the two lead characters that we have here who are at odds with one another. We have Scott Adkins. He plays Travis Preston. Okay, this is the lead. He is a cryptozoologist. I had to look this up to see if that was actually an actual profession. But he is a cryptozoologist who wants to ensure that so both parties, I guess we should say, are on the hunt for this legendary monster, we should say. And Scott Adkins, yeah, he is more of the environmentalist, I guess we can say. He wants to ensure that the beast is captured, but also studied. Okay, he's basically our Indiana Jones-esque adventurer here, only instead of mythical objects and places, he's after creatures and monsters. And then Dolph Lundgren, he's the antagonist. He plays Harker, who is extremely one note this entire movie. He's just this famed bounty hunter of mythical creatures who basically likes to capture them as trophies. And so you think that you're going into this and you hear that, okay, they're going to be on each other's tail trying to capture this monster. Unfortunately, the film, I found, really doesn't come alive until its final 25 minutes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I mean, there's an early scene, which we'll get to, where Scott basically runs after trying to find the creature. They think, oh, the creature's over there, and he sort of, and I don't know if they just didn't have the money or something for the thing, but the scene really goes nowhere. It's literally just Scott running through through grass, basically, and that's the scene doesn't have a huge amount of momentum. There's not really much of a payoff, but for the rest of it, I think they've tried to pace it. They've tried to do it like a kind of a Jaws kind of thing, but where, imagine, instead of the three guys in the boat, going out after in this case, they're on different boats and they've both got different agendas. So it's like, imagine Brody actually wanted to not kill the shark, he wanted to save the shark, but everyone else was, Quint was just trying to kill the shark. So anyway, that was just sort of came to mind. But the fact, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of expectations and that, there's some early, what I take as of promo shots, like promotional stills for the movie that are on the IMDb page. And one of them is Scott without his shirt doing a sort of splits high kick. And nothing like that happens in the movie. So I don't know if they had what they were trying to sell at one point. And then they were just like, no, it's not going to be him like fighting the monster in a sort of, the way, like when the Meg came out and everyone was joking, oh, Jason Statham's going to be doing like punching the giant shark on the nose and stuff like that. But it's not, so Scott is throwing himself into the performance as the character and not as sort of an action role. He's playing, like you say, this, cryptozoologist. He's an American, so he's putting on the American accent again, which is a little bit off-putting to me now because I'm more used to him using his natural accent or variations of his natural accent, being British basically. And I'm not 100%. It takes me a little bit out of the movie when Scott's playing an American, but it was making me think when I was watching it. Dolph's accent is kind of he kind of sounds American, and I was thinking, does Dolph put on because Dolph being Swedish, it started to make me think, when has his accent naturally changed? Is that how he speaks now, or is he putting on an accent? And no, that is how he speaks. He's talking the way he speaks. He doesn't sound Swedish anymore. I think maybe, having worked in America and that so long, his accent, changed. And I think he's got a great voice, but he doesn't have to put on anything artificial. Whereas Scott was even though this was a British-Chinese co-production, they were still trying to sell it as an American movie in that sense of we've got to have an American hero, even though in the beginning he's actually based in London, which I thought was quite funny because I was like, well, there's all these British people around him, but he's not allowed to be British for some reason. But I guess that's probably to do with distributors and sales and stuff, and that they make those decisions of Scott not being. I mean, this was a few years before Scott was allowed to start with films like Green Street 3 to actually start properly playing English characters, and so yeah, he gets introduced. Well, actually, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, so I'll let you backtrack. I'll come out now, and you can sort of set the scene of what happens in the opening part of the movie, because I've kind of run off ahead a little bit.
Well, you said a couple things that I want to get to real quick that I don't want to leave alone. But I mean, regarding the accent, yeah, you just made me realize how interesting it is how when certain actors have been ingratiated and involved in the Hollywood system for as long as they have, which is really interesting because this film is not a Hollywood production. This is a Chinese production through and through. But guys like Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme, their accents are still very, very much noticeable, and they always will be. Whereas guys like Dolph, for example, his accent is pretty much absent. Even if you look at a guy like Mel Gibson, if you look at interviews with Mel Gibson, he's pretty much, in a lot of ways, lost his accent as well. And I almost kind of wonder if in interviews he's just so used to putting on the American front that he has kind of ditched the Aussie lingo, I guess, is how you want to look at it. And I don't know, but look, before we dive into the film, and there's and that was a poor pun intended, dive into the film like the everyone dives in the water. Anyway, before we get to that, because I don't really think there's much with the film that really needs to be picked apart. But one thing is, look, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. This particular film was it was a big project in China. I mean, I guess big for independent direct-to-video standards like what we have here in the States. First of all, it was written by Andy Briggs, directed by another gentleman by the name of Eric Stiles. To be honest, I'm just going to admit it, I don't know a heck of a lot about these two guys. But if you look at their credits on IMDb, they're pretty steady. They're working hard in the worlds of independent direct-to-video cinema. Not a heck of a lot of action films, which I think is kind of noticeable in the final product of this film. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to the Chinese aspect, okay, I think that right there is one of the, in a lot of respects, kind of promising aspects about this film, okay, because this was filmed in China, and I think the fact that it was going to be filmed in China was one of the big that was the big impetus in getting guys like Scott Adkins and Dolph on board, was, going to China and filming a movie out there. It seemed to get a ton of support from the Chinese producers. And there are also, I directed you to this before we started recording, but yeah, there are various photos and stills that were shot when the film was in pre-production of Dolph and Scott Adkins at some kind of blessing ceremony before the cameras started rolling. I think, and I have some ideas about this, but I think that the producers of this film had really, really high hopes and lofty goals and intentions of this being a series or a franchise of sorts, where I guess Travis Preston and his team go on various adventures to capture other mythical creatures, whereas Harker is following them as well. I mean, especially if you look at this film before the credits roll, they really set it up for a sequel, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, this film had some money behind it in terms of its Chinese producers, and I will say that right there. So sorry, I'll finish here in a minute, but I think that right there is one of the promising things about this film. Is there are some absolutely beautiful shots of these Chinese islands and locales, and for me, looking at the film, the one of the perks is, like I said, that scenery. It almost makes you wonder if something could have been written utilizing all of this rather than throwing in this story about a mystical lizard monster.
Yeah, I think the Chinese film industry, they do like to use their landscapes, and they also do they do seem to love a creature feature. There's a lot. I mean, a lot of them don't make their way over to America or the UK or whatever, apart from via there's like YouTube channels, which some of them can be found on. They've done all sorts of stuff, but they seem to churn them out really regularly. What I think is the case in most of them is that the whole film, they're Chinese films with the special effects all done by China. Whereas in this case, it was more of a case of that they the British producers secured the support and funding in China, and the proviso was that they make it in China, and then so they shot it all there, and then they came back and all the post-production work was done outside of China. So I presume all the visual effects were all done London or something, but I'm not sure. But I think that's where they sort of balanced it. Whereas I think it was the theme and stuff that was really the appealing aspect to the Chinese investors. And I don't have a huge. I mean, I think it was made. It was made for an international audience, but it was really kind of made for the Chinese audience mainly, because that's where it ended up. You know, I think there's a couple of other areas where it had theatrical distribution, but I think in most cases it was straight to video and kind of got lost with various other monster movies, and Scott Adkins and contemporary kind of Dolph Lundgren movies are generally straight to video. They don't go theatrical, but in markets like China and sometimes Japan and stuff, movies that are of what the rest of us consider the DTV stuff can get theatrical releases. Like so another example would be Steven Seagal's Into the Sun, which was shot in Japan and had a theatrical release in Japan. It was quite, it had a slightly more invested into it. They slightly higher production values, and that's the same with this. This is much, as you say, with the cinematography. Xu Yang, who later did a film called The Bombing, which Bruce Willis co-starred in, funnily enough, released as Airstrike in the US. They've managed to get a lot of production value out of those locations, and just the shooting it really nicely. I'm not sure if the caves at the end are a set or not. I think there's it looks pretty authentic to me from the outside, but there's very little production design in the movie. There's like a very small, what is it like? Because it's like all to do with this pipeline construction project, isn't it? And we get there's like a very small workspace kind of environment that is used for a couple of scenes, but apart from that, it's all about the lakes and stuff, and so I think that's where the strength of the film is, with a lot of those natural locations.
You said a lot there, but I mean, when I finished watching this and when we were prepping for this, I had to kind of sit back and I had to think about it. I mean, look, a ton of American actors. I mean, a lot of these videos can be found on YouTube, but a ton of American actors will go over to Japan and China to film various commercials for toothpaste and various, energy drinks or whatever. And of course, they make their way over to America, and we look at them and we think, golly, that's weird. But I mean, again, kind of like this movie, I don't think this movie was not made for American audiences. I think that's kind of what I go back to, and that's kind of the caveat I think I'm going to grade this film on. Okay, similar to those commercials. Okay, to American audiences, Western audiences, we may look at them and think like, what in the hell is this I'm watching? Like, that is bizarre. That is the dumbest commercial in the world. But I mean, to us, I mean, it wasn't made for us, and I think that's kind of what. The way I look at this film is this was, I mean, you sent me over the box office numbers. This had a theatrical release in China, and everywhere else it was put on DVD. It wasn't even put on DVD. It was literally just kind of dumped on VOD with zero promotion. Interestingly, this was like we talked about. This was, I guess it was planned. The idea was that it was going to have a few sequels attached to it as well. It was filmed and shot apparently in 3D. There were quite a few. There was really only like 2 moments in the movie where I thought, okay, that probably would have been the 3D moment there. And I think they also had the I guess, did a mobile game come out for this, or was it released, or was it in development?
Well, it was. I mean, there was a trailer which is on YouTube, which was saying that it was coming out. So it seemed to be ready to come out. That it was advertising it to just be released. But I don't think it was potentially anything more than a mobile game. But I'm not sure. But interesting. That was something I just presumed would have been a Chinese developer producing that video game. But the company, it looks like the company that made it is in I think Northern Ireland. I don't know much about it apart from that. But what I thought was really interesting, what struck me about the video game footage was that it looked like you play as Harker, and that Harker is the sort of the hero in terms of this sort of scrolling video game or whatever it was. But there didn't seem to be much sign of the Travis character, who is the main character in the movie, but in the game, they definitely seem to wanted to focus on the Dolph character. So whether that was because they just were working on a different brief, they didn't understand what the movie was or something, but the footage of the game is very representative. You can tell it is an adaptation or based on this movie, because the creature looks like it, the settings and stuff that are in there look okay. It's very, very, rough standard, I would say, of a video game. But I'd love to find out a little bit more, but it's like, apart from that clip on YouTube, there's not really any information out there about it.
Well, I mean, if we just look at the film, I mean, like you said, we can get through this fairly quickly because, I mean, there's not a heck of a lot to this film. I mean, the film starts and introduces us to our 2 leads pretty much immediately, and we see very clearly that Preston and Harker have different methods and morals, I think we can say, for capturing their creatures. This time they're on the trail of a massive bear, which is the first of some questionable CGI, I think we can say. And a member of Scott Adkins' character, his character is Preston, obviously, a member of his character is killed, and so this event makes Preston feel responsible. As a result, Preston and Harker have parted ways, and they've now become enemies. And so what this has given us with with Scott Adkins' character is he kind of has the character who's, I guess we can say, a tortured soul, okay, who's kind of doubting himself and his methods. His next assignment is to go to China, where they are to capture another beast, okay, so this is the legendary character where the film derives its name. This beast, okay, is a mythical lizard monster, and of course, Dolph's character Harker is also on the trail of this beast and is hoping to nab it first. That's pretty much the impetus for the film. And interestingly, I mean, we're going to get to the cave here in a minute, but not much really happens. I mean, we talked about this a few minutes ago, but not much really happens between the team being assigned with tracking down the beast to then entering the beast's cave. I mean, all that pretty much happens in that in the interim between the assignment to the cave is maybe a few moments where some nameless characters are snatched out of the water by the legendary monster. Yeah. That's about it. I mean, I feel like the entire movie is just a giant setup to the final act where they go to the beast's lair, which happens to be a cave.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that in movies like this, typically, especially given the title, I mean, the title is legendary, originally legendary Tomb of the Dragon, and in some cases it's just known as Tomb of the Dragon or variations thereof. But there's no mythology about the creature. There's there might be a thing where they walk into the caves and they see cave paintings and stuff, or there might be, legends are passed around by the locals that they talk about. Oh, this thing, it's like literally this thing appears from nowhere, and there's nobody has any information about it whatsoever. There's no history to the creature at all, which I thought was quite interesting, because that's normally the way that the running time is filled, is with the sort of investigation part of it. And in this case, there is running around, and they talk to a couple of people, but it's more like a giant, it could be a giant crocodile or whatever it is. It's not a legendary creature. There is no legend. Do you see what I mean? It just sort of seems a bit strange that they've gone with that title.
Well, that's my second big issue with the film. So let's just get to that right now. I think the main monster of this film is the major issue. I mean, I feel like I would almost forgive a lot of this film's, a lot of the negatives, I guess, of this film, if, especially with how Lundgren and Scott Adkins are utilized. I almost would leave that alone if the monster was cool. And I feel like that's probably the biggest issue, I think, with the film, is the fact that this monster is just so basic and plain looking. I mean, you and I were talking again a few weeks back, but I gave The Relic a rewatch a few weeks back. Okay, directed by Peter Hyams, 1996, I believe. Tom Sizemore, Penelope Ann Miller. Okay, and it's an okay movie, but I think what I appreciated about that film the most is the fact that, okay, for the first 2 acts of that movie, it keeps the main monster in the dark for most of the film. But then, in the final act, when he is released and shown, that beast is a spectacle to see. I mean, it just looks awesome. Okay, here, with this particular film, when it is finally released and we finally see what the beast looks like, all it is just a great big overgrown iguana. Or something like that. It's like an iguana salamander.
Yeah, it's like a gecko salamander iguana. Yeah.
Which is just not scary, I don't think. I don't think it's intimidating at all, or really even interesting.
It's more like it's like a giant.
So as I was watching this,
could be a giant frog or something.
If anything, like put the money and the budget towards something bigger, better, and more inventive than what's on screen here. But for this film to be hyping it up to, okay, this legendary beast, this legendary monster, and for it to just be a giant gecko iguana thing, it was like that for me was a major letdown.
Yeah, and there's not much that's dragon-like about it. No matter which way you look at it, it's not. I mean, I know they dropped the dragon part, and maybe that's why. Maybe in most territories where it's just legendary, maybe they dropped the dragon bit because they weren't actually. We can't afford to make a dragon, so we're just gonna make a big gecko iguana kind of thing. There's certain bits of it look a little bit like the Godzilla from like 1998, but for the most part, it's a big gecko. It's not a particularly intimidating looking creature at all. The bear actually at the opening is a scarier creature. That's for all its flaws. There is some intensity there and stuff, but the stuff going on with the gecko and stuff is it's a bit damp, but again, sort of I guess makes it more family friendly. That it's not this horrific creature. There is a little bit of the play on the horror kind of elements, but less than Jaws, I would say. There's no blood in the water or anything like that. There's no blood at all. I don't think there's people get thrown around and somebody gets taken, but you don't ever see any blood that I recall. Do correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's all very, like you say, PG-13 kind of family friendly stuff. I just want to go back to the start, because one thing I thought about when I watched it recently was that opening that tragedy at the start, where and the burden that the hero has. I thought, isn't it funny that that's essentially a variation on the start of Expendables 2? Only in Expendables 2, when Liam Hemsworth dies, Stallone knows who, there's somebody he can go after, and that's the impetus of the story. It's a revenge thing. Whereas in this one, Dolph's there, Dolph isn't responsible. So it's not like he's going to go after Dolph. It's kind of like, they just kind of move past that point. But I thought it was interesting how these two movies that came out so close together have essentially got a variation on the same setup, but then they run off in different direction. Both having obviously Dolph Lundgren in.
Well, I think that's action movie shorthand. Is if you want to make your character, your lead hero, if you will, have a flaw, if you will, then it's the cliffhanger syndrome. Right. OK, this character is absolutely good at what he or she does. But we're going to have an event happen at the beginning of the movie that's going to cause the hero to kind of doubt his or her methods, which is just kind of frustrating because the characters that are in Scott Adkins' group, they're for the most part really pretty much given nothing. And so when some of them are eaten by the monster or killed, you really don't even care. You almost kind of forget that they're even there. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of nothing in a lot of ways. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well let's go for these characters then. So starting with Scott. Scott's really not got a lot to work with here. I mean, there's one moment where somebody says, "Oh, tell us your backstory," and he goes, "Oh, we were a kid when I was a kid, and I went and saw this creature and stuff." That's the only real character moment. There's no depth to any of the characters. I mean, there's some relationships are kind of, sort of in romantic relationships or what are hinted at, but nothing actually even fully develops there. So there's not a lot of character, and there's not a lot of character development. It's very on the surface. There's apart from, so he's feeling some remorse and that about the opening event and sort of bears some resentment there. But that's kind of, they ditch that. They don't really dwell on that too much. It's kind of, that was something that happened and then, we're off on the, he doesn't take that much encouraging to go on his next mission. And then it's all sort of a clean slate and he doesn't really get to do anything. They sort of introduce his few characters in the first scene. And then when they get to China, they introduce a couple more. And there's a little bit of conflict between some of the characters of what internal conflict. Let's say one of the Chinese characters is working with Harker, and then it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be working with Harker. Maybe I should be working with Travis. But there's nothing. There's nothing more. Is there? It's. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, this is a less than 90 minute movie. There's not a lot of. It's all sort of. It's quite fast paced for what it is, even though there's not a huge amount happening. But yeah, the characters are very, he's that guy who's going to sort of crack the jokes. Okay. That's that guy. And here's that guy who's going to be sort of the guy bankrolling it. And he's going to be the sort of eyes of the audience of the new person in the environment and or the sense of wonder and what, and there's not really going to be any more than that. It's all very on the surface. I don't mind that too much. It wasn't detrimental to the film, but I think in the case of Scott Adkins, I think they really needed more for him to be able to do, especially because he couldn't do the action, and they didn't have much for him to do. So the Dolph ends up stealing the movie by virtue of him having the more interesting character, and I think I really like Dolph in this. I think he actually fits the film really well. He's clearly enjoying himself. I loved all his deliveries and the sort of him just sort of being a bit I don't know, sort of playful with the sort of meanness or whatever. He was good. I liked him.
The moment, the moment
again, he doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah, well, the moment where Dolph comes face to face with the lizard, and he stares up at it, and he kind of does this awesome, kind of gulp face. You know what I mean? And then he gets
terrible. That is terrible.
Yeah. I laughed at it because it's just we've never seen Dolph act that ridiculous before. So yeah, he comes face to face with the lizard, and the lizard's getting ready to eat him, and he stares up at it. He does this ridiculous kind of face, right? And then he gets thrown across the cave, and then lands and then is knocked out, you'd think that would kill him, or better yet, you'd think that the monster would eat him, but I guess no, because they were planning on him coming back for a sequel that never materialized. As I was watching this, I was thinking to myself, okay, I mean, obviously, look, I don't think it's entirely fair to call out the CGI because, I mean, there are moments where the CGI is very, very laughable and goofy. And look, if you look at this film online, virtually 99.9% of all of the reviews call out the CGI as being terrible. And I mean, look, it's not fantastic. We could just say that. But I think as I look upon this, I feel like one of the big issues, because there are a few issues like we keep saying, but I think one of the other issues is that the film takes itself way too seriously. Okay, and I feel like, okay, if you're going into this at one of these producers or whatever, and you know that you're not working with a heck of a lot, or you know that the special effects that you're going to be employing are not going to be top notch, then I think there are one of two ways you can go about this. One, you can keep the monster in the shadows for pretty much the entire movie and have the characters dealing with that. Okay, that's one way. The other way I think you can go about it is if you do have bad CGI effects like this film does, then don't take it so seriously. Have fun with it and make it one of those Sci-Fi Channel original movies like a Sharknado, if you will, where everybody is playing the role completely tongue-in-cheek and ridiculous and goofy. And I think if you go about it that way, then the final product is at least going to be a little bit more endearing. But unfortunately, it doesn't do either of those things. It takes itself super seriously. Then when you do see this giant gecko monster that is attacking them, and then, I mean, let's face it, you mentioned it already, but there are moments where CGI is passable, I think, but it's when the human actors are interacting with the lizard where it looks ridiculous. I mean, mainly there's a scene where Scott Adkins is wrestling it off him, and he's kind of holding his rifle up to protect himself. I can only imagine how funny those behind-the-scenes videos were of Scott Adkins at the moment. But do you see what I'm saying about the seriousness versus the silliness of this film and how they could have leaned into it?
I think so. Yeah. But I'll be honest, I don't have a huge amount of problem with the tone or actually even the CG. I think after that initial viewing, I've kind of set my the expectations are all, by the by. I know what it is, and I go back in and watch it, and I've watched it twice this week, and I just think I think it is quite a good time. I think it's quite amusing in places. I liked it. I've got the there's a couple of there's not many actors. Most of the actors in it are supporting cast, I should say, are people you don't know. There's the guy who plays he says lawyer. I think somebody on IMDb made quite a good point that he would really introduce himself as a solicitor in England. But so the lawyer character, who's a very familiar actor from lots of sitcoms and stuff over here. But everyone else is kind of unfamiliar. But I quite liked him and the characters and the sort of little burgeoning romance stuff that goes on between the characters. Although there is a bit of confusion for me with Scott Adkins's female assistant. There are certain scenes that indicate some romance between them, and then they do the romance between her and the solicitor guy. And I just thought that was a bit contradictory. It was like, I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, he's kind of acting like it's his girlfriend a little bit, and then the other one. I don't know if they were a bit undecided about what relationships were going to develop there, but I don't mind the CG. In retrospect, I think it stands up. I've seen worse, both then and more recently. So I think it's not the CG itself, I think, that's the problem for me. It's the creature, the look of the creature and stuff. And a gecko, I can watch it, it's fine. But if they'd have made it, there had been some effort to make it a bit more intimidating, that would have helped. And that's sort of more the problem. What I find interesting, we go back to the 3D thing, is that the film was filmed in 3D, but there's no real point when I'm watching it that you think that they're playing up to that. The whole or pointing something out at the screen sort of approach to 3D that was, the what everyone think of with 3D of like something jumping out at you. There's not really a lot of stuff in the movie where jumping out at you stuff kind of happens. I mean, I presume that, when it did show in cinemas, that there wasn't a lot of 3D in it. I can't imagine a couple of bits with the creature jumping out of the water and stuff, maybe, but I can't see any more than that. So that's a bit weird. Interestingly, they had the guy who was who looks after the 3D on Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, came back for this one, or they hired him for this one. So there's a Scott Adkins connection there. But but that film as well, I don't think, because I never saw that in 3D. I don't know where that was released in 3D, but that's a very different kind of movie and had a lot of other stuff going on in it. So I think there was possibly more happened in that one. It'd be really interesting to see it. Do you know if Day of Reckoning was ever released? Is there a disc out there in 3D that you've heard of? Because there's definitely not one in the case of this film.
They've talked about it. I remember when it was in pre-production, it was mentioned, but I think that might have been, and I could be completely wrong, but I think that might have been one of the ways they were trying to kind of sell the film. But I don't know if they ever. Well, no, maybe they did film it in 3D, but it didn't really get a theatrical release, at least here in the States, at all. And the few theaters it played in, I know for a fact those weren't 3D. So I don't really know. Yeah, but last thing I will say about the CGI, which is pretty funny, is, okay, the only time we really see CGI is when the characters are all in the dark, okay, when they're in the cave or at the beginning when they're chasing the bear at the dark, which, let's be honest, I think it's in the dark so that they can better mask what they're working with, because there's a moment where, I don't know about you, but I busted up laughing. So the film ends where Preston's team rejoice at the fact that they've been able to capture this legendary lizard beast safely and humanely. Although, unfortunately, any scenes of the titular beast in daylight or in captivity are never shown. So I guess we just kind of have to take the character's word for it that, oh yeah, they were able to capture that beast off screen, and we just have to kind of go with it. So, all right, there's the budget for you.
Yeah, we don't get a Godzilla Kong kind of thing where we see it being carried by helicopters and stuff like that. It's literally just, it's actually before that, where the bit where Adkins survives at the end, and he's told everyone else to go, and they're out on the boat. He gets from the cave out to their boat, swims out really quickly. It's I just thought that it felt like there was a disconnect between those scenes, or maybe something was missing. I don't know. It just sort of seemed a bit funny because did he hold his breath all the way there or something? But and swim like whoosh, really quickly or something. Anyway, but yeah, you never see that. You kind of have that finale with the creature, and then you don't really see much of it. After that, I think all they do at the end is repeat a shot which we saw earlier in the film of it swimming in the water, which earlier in the film it was in the lake, and now it's in a lake, but it's in a compound. They didn't even do extra footage, they didn't do extra animation for that. They just used the same thing, which is I'm not sure, did they capture, because it turns out there's two creatures, I think, but did they capture the little one or the big one? I'm not sure on that. Or did they capture?
I thought it was they captured the big one. I thought. Oh. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, listeners out here, spoiler. Sorry, Rich. Golly, man, you just spoiled it. We find out there's actually two
man, I'm sorry.
Of these.
No, I'm sorry.
I was more perturbed and amazed at the fact that, again, another line that they just throw out in passing dialogue at the end of this film. We find out that Harker mysteriously disappeared from the cave and is never seen again. So not only was he able to survive being thrown across the cave, hitting the wall of the cave, falling down at least 20, 30 feet. He doesn't get bloody. He doesn't, or any broken bones that we know of, anything like that. But that's the last we see of him in this particular film, is him just knocked out. And then the characters just kind of casually toss aside, Oh, Harker disappeared. No word from him. Oh, well, if he does show up again, we'll be ready. We'll be waiting. And you're kind of like, what? Like, what happened here? And then what's also funny is how they're all happy and rejoicing at the fact that, okay, yeah, they were able to capture this legendary monster. And then the team, they're alerted to their next assignment, which apparently is to search for some mystical winged flying creature. And as they're discussing this, the camera pans out and the credits roll. Clearly, they're trying to set this up for the next film, which is always a bit of a risky gamble to do. And again, another spoiler for you. None of those sequels ever arrived.
No, and I think that's a shame because I would have actually really liked to see another one. I think maybe if it had done well and they could have invested a little bit more in it. I think this was also the first, the producer, Chris Milburn, was looking at it as, oh, this is a new opportunity. We're going to make more films in China. And, you know, I think this was like a one and done kind of thing in both senses. They didn't get to do a franchise, and they also didn't, as far as I know, they didn't make any more films in China. It just was an experiment that kind of didn't pay off. Interesting. I thought going back to the director, Eric Stiles, you commented about him not doing action, and that's very much true. He'd worked with Chris Milburn, the producer, twice before, and one was like a period film, and the other was like a very light British comedy based on an old Coward play. And he's kind of a journeyman director. He's done lots of other things, including thrillers in America with Melanie Griffith and stuff like that. But this is a very odd film in his filmography. He's very much a journeyman, and maybe he was like, oh yeah, I'll try something different. But I think maybe some of the flaws are that he's more of a people person kind of director. He wants to, he needs a strong script and strong actors, and you know, for the strong comedy and drama and stuff. And in this movie, he's kind of out of his element because having that sort of having that creature, which he, obviously he couldn't visualize or have on set or anything. Maybe that was a problem for it, and that's why it didn't sort of pan out for him. But I thought in terms of what him and the cinematographer and everything pulled together in terms of the overall look and feel and pacing of the film, I think was fine. And I do quite like that ending, and there's a little bit of a twist thrown in. Obviously we have the twist that I've just spoiled, but there's another twist which I won't spoil. There's another little turn of events at the very end, and I think there's more that.
See, and I didn't stay long enough for that. Do I need to? I didn't stay long enough for that. Do I need to go back through and watch the credits?
No, that's just before it pulls out. If the twist with the character being revealed to be a different to who he said he was.
Okay, for some reason I thought you meant. Okay, all right. I was getting worried there, Rich. I thought this was going to pull like a Marvel post-credits thing or something like that. There's not like a bit where like an egg is shown or anything like that. But so that bit where they reveal the compound and they pull back and they start playing Bryan Adams, it was that was a very CG shot, and I wonder if that was one of the sort of the signature shots they were trying to do with 3D or something. I don't know, but again, that doesn't quite work. I mean, it's very obviously CG, and not really. And even in that shot, you don't see the creature when they pull out. There's no because normally you would see if let's say if it was a Jurassic Park or something, I would pull back and there's all the dinosaurs in the background while they're in the sort of safety of the compound kind of thing. And it's like, no, you literally don't see anything. It's just a landscape, but it's just a CGI landscape. So that's a bit odd. But so the creature itself that is not shown at the end of the movie. There's no bit, like Ghostbusters where Slimer sort of flies towards the camera or something. A lot of movies would do the last shock with the creature. It's like they just go, no, we're not going to show the creature anymore. Now he's been caught. It's like that's done. We're not going to worry anymore about that. Let's just concentrate on the new adventure. Get all excited for the next adventure, which isn't going to happen. Wasn't that? I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, that was Bryan Adams playing at the end. What was the name of that song? Is it "Tonight in Babylon"?
Tonight in Babylon.
That plays at the end.
Yeah, it's not a Bryan Adams song, but it's a song he co-wrote and does the vocals on. But it's like some DJ or something is actually sort of the credited main artist who did the music and stuff. But I do think it's a really catchy song. It's just very odd at the end of this movie. It just doesn't really
weird
fit.
Coming in. Yeah,
it's very weird.
Well, I think we've found the song that's going to play at the end of this episode. So there you go. If it wasn't weird enough to come in at the end of that movie, it's going to be even weirder coming in at the end of this song. Well, you know what? One of the reviews I was reading, and I know we're getting to the end, but one of the reviews that I read brought up a really interesting comparison, I think we can say, is, do you remember those movies from the 70s with Doug McClure?
Yes.
So this one it's kind of similar to those particular films, which I think is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with making a movie today that kind of harkens back to a forgotten genre. But I think, kind of going along with what I said earlier, I think if you're going to do that, then either A, make an effort to kind of at least update it, okay, just a little bit, slightly, or purposely lean way far into the silly. But this isn't doing that. And again, I think it's taking itself serious, so it ends up kind of being right on par with those Doug McClure films from the late 70s, which is really interesting considering this came like almost 40 years after those particular films. But anyone who's coming in and seeing Legendary, I highly recommend you check out any of those McClure films. Weren't there a couple that were like something in Atlantis, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, and Warlords of Atlantis.
Yes, yes, Warlords of Atlantis, yes. So, in any case, well, Richard, this has been a ton of fun. I mean, I always love chatting with you, and it always gives us a good excuse to try new beverages. But as we wrap this up, as we get to the end, what do you think? What is your final take? I know you're huge also, I know you're a big fan of Scott Adkins as well. So looking at this film as a film in general, but also as a Dolph Lundgren vehicle and as a Scott Adkins vehicle, where does this one stand for you, and would this one get a recommend?
It does get a recommend. I think with reservations, as long as you know what you're getting when you're going into it, I think it's definitely worth seeing. It's interesting to see Scott in a non-action heavy role, and it's also cool seeing Dolph playing this quite fun villain. And yeah, it's just something a little bit different in both their filmographies, especially coming off of the Expendables and Universal Soldier. To non-fans, I think I think I would still recommend it as a light Sunday afternoon view. But if you're not invested in Scott and Dolph as a fan, and you're coming at it completely you probably won't know who anyone. You're coming if you were coming. Let's say I showed it to my mum or something, who probably wouldn't know who some of these guys are. I think they'd probably be. It would be fine. It would be. Disposable viewing. It's not going to offend anyone or upset anyone. They might be a bit like, I'd rather have watched, The Mummy or something instead, where a lot more is happening. But I still think there's something to enjoy here. I just think you have your expectations in check. It's certainly a lot better than, let's say, The Asylum have done some of those kind of adventure films. They've tried to do their take on Alan Quatermain and things like that, and they've got no money. And I think it's much, much better than an Asylum movie. It's just not as good as a Hollywood movie generally. It sits in a very awkward middle ground. It's kind of it's not everything that they hoped it would be. Sorry, I'm rambling, but yes, I do recommend it.
Yeah, well, no, thank you very much for that. I mean, for me, I felt like this film is for Dolph Lundgren and Scott Adkins completists only. I really don't think anybody else is going to want to seek this out or sit through it. I think it's it's only to be watched by fans to kind of fulfill that necessary mandatory viewing quota, I think we can say. Other than the beautiful scenery that's on display, I really don't think there's much else of note in this one. The special effects aren't as terrible as some of the reviews have pointed out. However, they're still very, very laughable considering both Dolph and Scott Adkins are trying with what they've been given. But in the end, it's not nearly on the level of what we've come to expect, appreciate, and love from both of these stars. For me personally, I didn't find it to be an awful movie, but it also wasn't silly enough to enjoy Mystery Science Theater 3000 type viewing experience either. So you and I are kind of similar in some respects. I think you probably enjoyed it a little bit more, but I really do appreciate you coming on. I had a great time chatting with you. So thank you for, and again, man, you watched this thing twice in 1 week in preparation for this. So your dedication, Richard, is commendable for so many reasons. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I always try my best, and I just wanted the one thing I didn't mention earlier, which is the music for the film, which is kind of I think of it as like a National Treasure style of score, like dun 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 dun. It's very lively. I do think that's one of the more fun aspects of the movie is that music. So I just want to sort of credit that as something, because I feel bad that I didn't mention that earlier. I don't have the name of the composer to hand, but I thought they did quite a good job there, and. Yeah, no, it was great. Thanks for. It's nice to have an excuse to watch it again, because it's not one I've seen for quite a long time, and I did enjoy it, and I did enjoy it both times that I watched it.
Well, before I let you go, is there anything you want to give a shout out to, plug, or mention? I know we've talked before about your respective podcasts, but what's new? What's going on? The time is yours. The mic is yours. You have control of the show. What's new?
No, just thank you. Yeah, we do a weekly podcast. My pal Mike and I, it's his show, the DTV Digest, and that we put out episodes every week. But there's a side project that I manage, which is the DTV Digest Short Shots Twitter feed, where we post a new, a recommended short film every day at 8:00. That's a project I really enjoy. So I sort of scour through quite a lot of films, and I've discovered so many great things through there, both from established filmmakers and new filmmakers working in at different levels of budget. And we've got well over 500. I mean, probably over 600 now by the time you're listening to this. And so many films of different genres, from martial arts and action and horror and stuff. So if listeners, Dolph hasn't really made any short films, so I can't point you in the direction of any that he's done. But I would say, if you've not spent much time watching short films, do have a little dip in. There's some really great stuff out there. That I would definitely encourage seeking out. So, for example, there's a Roddy Piper did a film called Portal to Hell, which is a huge amount of fun. And I've also recently discovered there was a film with, I can't remember the name of it now, but there was one with Marissa, Laboratory Conditions. That was what it was called. Yeah. So Marissa Tomei did a film called Laboratory Conditions, which I discovered, that was from a few years ago. I didn't know about that. So that and those films and much more, 7 days a week, around 8:00 UK time. Please do check out the DTV Digest Short Shots, or DTV Short Shots as it is on Twitter. That's the handle.
Well, Richard, again, thank you very, very much. I do appreciate it. To everyone out there who is listening, please feel free to rate and review the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you go to subscribe. We always appreciate the reviews. And closing out this episode, we are going to pull a bit of a 180, tonally, similar to what the film Legendary did as well. Closing out this episode will be the song Tonight in Babylon, performed by Love Rush UK, featuring Bryan Adams. This is the song that played in the closing credits for Legendary. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time on I Must Break This Podcast.
We'll be celebrating, dancing until dawn. Come on, dry your tears now. Put your dark glasses